And for those who don't know, X is pretty much this premise around how there's this film crew, adult film crew kind of thing, and it's 1979. They go to this farm with this old couple there. They approve of this. They let them go into this farm, but what they don't realise is that the old couple's gonna come after them and everything like that. And you see a lot of nudity in this movie. You see all of that. You see the suspense building. So what it does is it builds towards that. And it did weird me out with the old couple. And it is quite an odd movie. Like, it's one of the oddest movies I've watched. Like, I've been dipping my toes more into horror movies. And so having a bit more of an exotic and exploitive kind of sexual horror movie was an interesting mix to say the least. So I did like that, and Mia Goth is in it. It's one of these actresses that are in it, and she's a good actress in it. And there's also Jenny Ortega from the Wednesday Show and all this stuff, and they all kind of play into it. Yeah, man, it got really interesting to say the least. And I think it's like there was all this hype surrounding X and Peril, and I do think to an extent it lives up to the hype. Like X is, and it's not even like scary horror. It's like, oh, we're seeing the hot ladies do the hot things, getting recorded on camera. Yo, let's go. That's kind of what it feels like. It's not like, oh my god, they're coming after me. I'm gonna die. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then the old couple have sex in the movie, and it's just kind of weird. And
You are about to experience the James Rambling Show, hosted by James Patty.
hello, welcome back to the James Rambling Show for yet another episode. And in today's episode, I've got quite a few topics for you, as per usual. Last week we had a guest on, bringing that up because there's some stuff I wasn't able to talk about because there was kind of different topics, and there's a few more movies I watched a couple of weeks back that I found a bit interesting to discuss, and so let's dive into it. So the first topic I've got for you today is the Baby John Mullaney stand-up special. As you're all aware, I'm like getting really into stand-up in the past like 4 or 5 months. Like I had Louis C.K., had Daniel Sloss, had the Chris Rock the episode discussion thing I did where I talked about his special like almost a couple months ago. Like that was the first episode when we moved here and we're in this new backdrop. That was that first episode. So to say the least, I've really got myself into stand up. And I remember, just to give you a bit of context, this is going to feel like a James Allen Reviews episode, but just to give you a bit of context, I watched one of John Mulaney's specials back in 2022, and I just randomly found it on Netflix. Thought it was the funniest thing in the world, but I did rewatch his other two specials, like bits of it, like 16 minutes of both, just to see, okay, what's his humour like? What's his humour like? Ideally, I would have watched both specials back to back, but I just want to get a little taste of his humour, and it did feel kind of a different style. Like he's not super dark and crazy like Louis C.K. or how Daniel Sloth went insane on those jokes, and Chris Rock with his whole humour about the Meghan Markle and abortion. It is not one of those guys, and so getting into this special called Baby J, he he jokes about how he was this coke addict, and then he had this whole thing where he went through this therapy process, this interject. Let me Google that. Let me go into the. I'll go into Netflix, right? I was planning on re-watching it, but I just thought, why don't I just talk about it because it was like 5 days ago I watched it. So I'm just gonna go on Netflix right now and tell you what the heck I watched here. So there's like a summary. So it's called John Mulaney, Baby J, and it says a chaotic intervention and action-packed stay in rehab. After a weird couple of years, John Mulaney comes out swinging in his return to the stage. So that's kind of what he did, right? He was in this rehab in 2020, right? And then it sort of like went on and on and on to where he's came back from that and he's joking about how he's a psycho crazy man who took all these drugs, jokes about all the doctors. He does touch on January 6th for a bit, which was an interesting take, as of course, right, he's not like a superimposed super crazy comedian. He's just telling these jokes about his life and all of that, and not as like, oh, the Jews or anything, nothing like that. He's not one of those comedians. And so seeing him kind of joke about that giving that edge of the January 6th stuff was interesting to see. On top of that, right, I was laughing my ass off, right? I was laughing my ass off through this special. It was like, ha 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 ha. It's like, with my hand like that, boom, 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 as I was sitting on the chair. I had to grab a few drinks of water. So I was really into this special. And I will say that it does still add that element of, okay, when you're not at the stand-up special, when you're not actually at the stand-up event physically, it's kind of different to when you're at home because you're not with the crowd and there's not that sort of feedback where there's everyone around you joking with you. It's just you at home laughing at this thing. So you get that contrast. But even with that said, I still thought the special was enjoyable. It's a bit different to his other stuff where definitely a bit of an improvement to his other stuff. He's got more to talk about now, more to joke about now, more material. That's kind of what comedians do. Also, Mark Norman might be coming to New Zealand in June, so I might talk about that as well. I'll just keep talking about stand-up for as long as I want to, because it is a topic that very much interests me. So with that out of the way, there were these movies I did watch a couple weeks back. Peril, X, Peril and Infinity Pool, and there was this Nicolas Cage movie called Pig, but I will go on for about 5 or 6 minutes about these movies, maybe a bit longer, because there's like X and Peril are connected, and Infinity Pool is just like its own side project. So for those who don't know, X and Peril are these A24 productions that came out in 2022. And there was like all these movies that came out in 2022, and I'm like, oh, I've heard about this movie slightly. I've heard these movies slightly, right? Never got around to them because there's so much stuff coming out nowadays. So then I went on to Neon and watched X. And for those who don't know, X is pretty much this premise around how there's this film crew, adult film crew kind of thing, and it's 1979. They go to this farm with this old couple there. They approve of this. They let them go onto this farm. But what they don't realise is that the old couple's going to come after them and everything like that. And you see a lot of nudity in this movie. You see all of that. You see the suspense building. So what it does is it builds towards that. And it did weird me out with the old couple. And it is quite an odd movie. Like, it's one of the oddest movies I've watched. Like, you know, I've been dipping my toes more into horror movies, and so having a bit more of an exotic and exploitive kind of sexual horror movie was an interesting mix to say the least. So I did like that, and Mia Goth is in it. It's one of these actresses that are in it, and she's a good actress in it. And there's also Jenny Ortega from the Wednesday Show and all this stuff, and they all kind of play into it. Yeah, man, it got really interesting to say the least. And I think it's like, there was all this hype surrounding X and Peril. And I do think to an extent it lives up to the hype. Like, X is, and it's not even like scary horror. It's like, oh, we're seeing the hot ladies do the hot things, getting recorded on camera. Yo, let's go. That's kind of what it feels like. It's not like, oh my god, they're coming after me. I'm gonna die. Yeah. But then the old couple have sex in the movie, and it's just kind of weird. And that's what I like about A24 is that they just go for these most randomly obscure films and say, like, let's just do this anyway. I don't care. We're not sticking to this one singular formula. We're just going to go outside the box all the time. And that's what I've been hearing about A Beau is Afraid, which is another kind of A24 experimental sort of stuff. So with that said, I think X is good. And then you get Peril, which is the prequel, and this is about the character Peril, and it's kind of different from Mia Goth's performance as Maxine in X. It's more of a prequel, and then you get her mother and her father, her father's ill, so there's that stuff going on. It's in a farm. She's thinking about her husband who's in the war and what will happen when he comes back, but she's dreaming about becoming a star, and you get to see her wanting to become a dancer and even an adult star. but it isn't as a full-on sex and nudity as compared to X. It's more about developing this deep story that leads to this chaos of her pretty much killing her own parents, which she just hates her parents. She wants to get off this farm and pursue what she wants to pursue. And it's one of those movies, and definitely have to give them an appreciation for trying to go back to the old roots of filmmaking. Like, some of the filmmaking in this movie feels old school, and nowadays we need 20 million, 200 million, 300 million, 400 million, 500 million, 600 million, 700 million budget films. Where we're having either CGI, we're reshooting it, and then it just is like a green screen, volume green screen. No, this movie kind of sabotages that modern trope, and it's like, okay, let's go back to the old roots of cinema. And so that's what's great about these movies, is that they just like subvert the idea of modern filmmaking and go back to the basics. And so that's what's great about them, and recommend them. Definitely slept on these movies. Like, I should have watched these like ages ago when they came out. And there's going to be a follow-up sequel in this sort of set little trilogy or little saga that A24 has put together here, called Maxine, and so we're going to see that, how it follows through from the events of X. So I will be interested to see that. Also, Mia Goth is going to be in this new Blade Marvel movie. I hope that's good and it's rated R and everything, but we'll just have to see. So then there's Infinity Pool, and I mentioned earlier this is a side project, because indeed this is a side project, because it's nothing to do with X in Peril, but it features Mia Goth, it features Alexander Skarsgård, I believe, who was in The Northman. So you got out of that, but the basic premise of this film is how, like, these rich people at this resort, there's like this, and his name's James Foster, I believe, is Alexander Skarsgård's character. He's like this author, he writes this book, and it's like this place, it's like a Mediterranean place, like the resort, and it's like, James Foster has like an Australian wife or whatever, and then he meets this couple who's Mia Goth and her husband, sort of stuff or whatever. And then Mia Goth's like, this place is crazy, we'll make sure you don't get sent to prison because this is a crazy place and want you to be safe. And they do all of that stuff, and she has her English accent. In Ex Peril she had more of a Texan accent, but she's more of a English accent in here. But you say, oh, you're not allowed, you shouldn't go to prison, we're not going to take you to prison, we're totally not going to take you to prison here. And then James Foster runs over this person, and then he goes to this jail. But this jail, right, you think of a jail, normal standard stuff, where they're on, where these orange suits and they eat all this horrible food. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we go to this prison, right, they go to this prison to do with cloning, to where this clone suffers more than the original version of yourself, and it's this crazy, messed up, weird little plot we have here. But I'm not gonna go off and tell you about every single plot, like continue what happens in the plot, because if you go in blind, you're just gonna witness some absolute chaos, because it's called Infinity Pool, and it's like this constant infinity pool of madness that keeps going on and on and on and on and on and on. And that infinity meaning it goes on and on and on. And they're in this pool and all these like trippy scenes. If you have epilepsy, is that what it's called? Epilepsy, like that thing where you can't really see blurry things. You don't like seeing blurry stuff. Don't recommend it if you have that sort of condition, because there is so many like flashy scenery, and it's like crazy stuff like that, and there's like these weird masks. There is like some sex scenes in this movie, but it's like that whole was like trippy sex scenes. It's quite an odd film, and I did watch this late at night, and so it was kind of it made me not sleep that well. The next day I wasn't having the best sleep during this sort of experience, but I'm glad that I'm trying to dip my toes into other kind of movies, and as you'll see with my Evil Dead review I put out yet last night, I'm kind of dipping more into that horror side of things, and I do want to get into that because, I'm kind of just, I don't want to keep consuming like, meh media anymore. I'm kind of sick of all that meh stuff coming out from MCU stuff, and clearly The Mandalorian was horrible and stuff. So enough of that. Right, I've kind of went on a lot about X Peril Infinity Pool. Yes, call me Mia Goth and the Mia Goth simple all day you want, but right, So there was another movie that I did watch called Pig, and this was another like random movie I decided to watch. It's Nicolas Cage trying to go out find his pig again because some people stole it, and you think it's going to be this John Wick crazy revenge action fest. Well, it's like a slow build with chapters and all this stuff. And Nicolas Cage from time to time can be a hit or miss, as you have things like The Old Way that weren't like the greatest thing, the dramatic and stuff. So he tries to experiment, dip his toes into these other kind of stuff and other kind of movies, and that was great about it. Like, it was just a slow build. It's like, and then it just keeps going on, and yeah, that's what's great about it. Other than that, really, I don't know what else to say. But it came out in like 2021. It's quite a random movie. I didn't expect it to be like kind of that good. It was actually quite an alright movie. Like, I don't see myself rewatching it constantly, but it was a good movie for what it was, and it did what it needed to do. And so once it did that, it was amazing. So enough of that, right? We've kind of talked about the stand-up stuff. We talked about X, Peril, Infinity Pool, and Pig. There was some other movies, but I'm just going to go on for another 59 minutes about that stuff, so we're not going to touch too much on that. However, it came to my attention that a couple of weeks ago I wasn't able to do this sort of thing and talk about it because we had Tim Sharp on the show. So a couple of weeks back, there was this announcement of a Harry Potter reboot, and if you remember what I said about Harry Potter like last year on June, so wasn't like the biggest fan of it during that movie kind of episode we did. Wasn't the biggest fan of Harry Potter. I still really I'm not the biggest fan of it. And like I remember trying to watch the first movie and getting really bored a few years ago. I was just never into it. But you know me, when it comes to this stuff, it's like, rather than trying to be creative, rather than trying to do something interesting and different, we're gonna reboot a series beloved by fans, right? Like the Harry Potter is in eight movies. You've got all these books. You've got Hogwarts Legacy. You've got all these spin-off games and all this stuff, right? You've got all this stuff right here, and then HBO Max decides to make a reboot TV series of it, and pretty much they're pretty much going to annoy the fans with this because you're not gonna have the same actors from the movies. You're gonna have a completely different cast. You might even retell the story a bit, so it's just gonna feel weird, and it honestly just sounds like a giant cash grab from the sound of things. So I'm not really happy about that sort of stuff. If I was even if I was big into Harry Potter versus if I wasn't that big in Harry Potter, I'd still be mad either way. And you could make the argument that, oh James, this doesn't affect you because you're probably not going to watch the series and you're probably not going to, alright? All that stuff aside, but I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, like, there is so many ideas, right? You've seen what I've talked about with Peril. We've trying to go back to the basics of old school filmmaking, all this stuff, and then you get stuff like this where reboot, and then you've got the Disney live action remakes, and Peter Pan vs Wendy, or what the hell came out recently. So you've got this whole entire like phase of stuff where like it's all about just rebooting and rehashing and bashing and bushing and bashing franchises rather than telling interesting stories. So other than that, really, that's kind of like my kind of rant. I think it's a dumb idea. They shouldn't do it. But you know what? Money. Money is the reason why HBO Max is doing it. I think they changed it to Max, actually. So outside of that, there's another kind of like Max, HBO Max thing that happened that I never got to talk about because we were with Tim Sharp and talking about other stuff. So there was also the Penguin teaser trailer, which I do want to touch on. We did talk about trailers a few weeks ago, but I might as well bring it up again here because the Penguin centers around that Penguin from the Batman, which I did like. Not the most perfect movie, but it looks interesting. We're getting to see like this Goodfellas kind of mobstery-ish series of the Penguin, played by Colin Farrell. So I'm interested to see where that's going to lead. I hope it's a great series. I do hope it's a good series. So there's that. Definitely, we've covered quite a lot on the show today. Actually, there is also the Metallica album, and I did talk about Metallica a while back on the James Ramlin show, but I think I should talk about this because I think this is definitely a return to form for Metallica here, right? Like Metallica I've liked them. They're quite a nice band to listen to. They made this new album called 72 Seasons, and I do want to shout it out because it is quite a good album. Like, you've got the there's really good guitar riffs. They all sound great. Like, I would play some of this music, but I feel like I'm gonna get copy striked. Right, we might play like 5 seconds of one of the songs, but I'll go onto Spotify and just list off the names of these songs, right? Just so you know what I'm talking about. So, right, Metallica. I have re-listened to the album like 7-ish times now. So it's 72 seasons, and then it's Shadows Follow, Screaming Suicide, Sleepwalk My Life Away, You Must Burn, Lux Eterna, Crown of Barbed Wire, Chasing Light, If Darkness Had a Sun, Too Far Gone, Room of Mirrors, and Inna Morta, or whatever. Right, and there was these songs that kind of released progressively, but I feel like it is a good album, and it kind of just cements that Metallica can make those old school kind of rocky sort of songs. So there is the good lead. There's a good lead singer as well in here. You know, I like Master of Puppets, and when that happened in Stranger Things, I really liked that. But other than that, really, we've kind of had this round table of similar topics. But you know, these things happen recently. I can't really do much about that. It gives me something to talk about. It ensures I can continue this podcast and not run out of ideas, even if some of the stuff is repetitive. So, other than that, really, hope you enjoyed this James rambling episode that felt all sort of like a James rambling reviews, James rambling show kind of episode, because we've pretty much reviewed 5 things here and ranted about like one thing. So, yeah, see you next week for another edition of the James Rambling Show. I have made playlists of like podcasts. I've situated some playlists into podcast versions because YouTube is smart enough to do that for me so that I can have that. So, like playlists and then podcasts, so it's easier to explore the podcast and find all the episodes rather than scrolling through 67 videos or whatever we've made of this show. So, see you next week. Bye.